Thank you for... All right, welcome back. You're watching Morning Prime Global today here. We continue our pace with the conversation. And by the way, Farah, I think some fans are here. We have one viewer saying the morning Kaka. I've enjoyed Farah Malim's point about Somalia. Haiti should be invited to discuss before jumping in there, gun blazing to beat people. Right, this is just one viewer who is appreciating your comment as well. I think also we had a comment from a viewer as well, from Dr.
Yes, it's one of Engineer Okara who is saying...
a friend to both of us. Yeah.
A friend to both of us.
Okay.
Yes.
Fantastic, fantastic stuff. We were to circle back, and I think, Farah, you would... I had interrupted you, then we go to Professor Mashari.
Yes.
I will have...
you get a rejoinder.
You'll get it.
But you'll get a rejoinder after Professor Mashari.
You get it. Now, let me tell you one thing. What you have to understand is that, you know, history, which both of them have done, is for me one of the most important fields in Africa. We need to... History has got to become a compulsory subject, global history. In every... Doesn't matter what discipline you are, even if you're doing engineering. Because for you to become a good engineer who is going to help in the development of this country, you have to understand the history of your people and the history of development itself. Now, we have Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow. In Moscow. Yeah?
It's called Radin
now. Yeah. You know, we all know how Patrice Lumumba lost his life. He was seeking the independence of Congo to manage its own resources. And the Belgians and the Americans, the people who killed him, the CIA killed him, they say that. Did not want that. They wanted to keep on drawing on the natural resources of the Congo, which they still draw on up to even now, although things are changing now. I'm getting a slight, you know, flicker of hope in what's happened in the last couple of weeks, in which they're basically throwing out everybody. And then this is the only time now Apple and Google and the rest of them are beginning to see things are not going right, because they're even laying off some of their workers, I'm told, in certain parts, because the coltan is not coming in as freely and as fast as they used to come before. Somalia is one country that I have so much hope for that trajectory. Sometimes you have to have misfortune for you to come out of that misfortune and draw on that history and do a very good thing. The fact that Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud has gone into a strategic contract with the Turkey, to have a certain sharing format for their own natural resources, both the marine as well as the development of all those blocks, in which I'm told is about 37. Somalia is still going to keep about 70 of that, is something that has jolted the entire Western world right now. They don't know how to deal with that. What now the Niger has done right now, I'm told there's nothing they can do. If they didn't have the Wagner in there, but the Wagner is inside Niger, don't be cheated. You know what I mean? They would have gotten rid of them. All three of them, they would have gotten rid of them. I know of a friend who had a very close relationship with the leadership in Chad, and in which the Chadian told him, look, I know how France is exploiting our country and the awful things they do to us, but what can I do? The moment I raise my voice, that is a military camp there. Those guys are going to pick up one of my own brothers and cousins here and kill me here in my own palace here and take over the country and say there was a coup in Niger. And that's how they've done for the longest in all those former French colonies. Plus the continuation, I love this lady who was the special envoy of AU to the United Nations from Zimbabwe. I forget, she has a very tough name, so I have a problem, you know, who was talking about the continuation of the colonization of those countries, yeah? And the manner in which they dealt with the two countries that said, no, we don't want to be part of it. It was Nigeria, it was Guinea and another country. And I can't remember the other one, in which they went and even they removed the toilets. They destroyed, they put in concrete into everything, into the sewages and the rest of it, to leave this country completely barren. So there is a crude, primitive manner in which the West has dealt with us from the... plus Algeria. From the manner they dealt with us from the beginning using...
Thank you.
Let me just finish. Using sheer force. to enslave us, to colonize us, to exploit us, and everything else. And they have never been able to say things have changed. These people are much more smarter than they were before. Now you need to deal with them a bit softer, but a bit more cleverly. No, they're still using those crude medical tactics.
Thank you.
So for now, Russia is, I think, we start the shift, as you put it, Kharenja, and I'm very happy you take note of these things, despite the fact that you might lose a bit of the fundings that you used to get from some of us.
No, there's no funding. We are friends.
But you need to wind up. I need to hear from Professor. We move on.
I'll wind up.
No.
Just 2 sentences.
I need to bat it now.
One sentence, yeah. Now, I think things are changing. The continent and the third world countries, there's a shift, and this shift is endemic to any civilization that is on its way to collapse.
Right, Professor Macharia?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, there is a movement in the continent of unhappy people, unhappy with their governance, unhappy with the external controls. And the 3 countries in West Africa are showing the way. And it is also here in Kenya, if people are not careful. A movement of unhappiness. Yes. And it takes time to mature. So if things continue to be done the wrong way, which sometimes it appears to be the case. So what's happening in Niger, and with those people telling the Americans, okay, thank you very much, pack your bags and go.
Take a walk.
We don't need you here.
Yeah.
And that's in itself is a surprise, because you have this attitude that you need us.
More than we need you.
And therefore, you have to do what we want you to do. At one time, some American junior diplomat saying, well, we can help you negotiate with the Chinese. So I say, well, what the hell are you talking about? Because that's assuming that you are dumb and you don't know what you are doing. So what you have is people are waking up. And I think in part because of the education they might have been receiving over time. And I think that idea of the people being made to do history, they should all, from baby school to the university, nobody should graduate from a Kenyan university without having done a study of Kenyan history or something, which is one of the tragedies, because we have now policymakers who are clueless. And in part because they never bothered to study it. And so things are going wrong, and you try to, why is it that they are going wrong? Oh, the person in charge has no idea of what he or she is doing. And then they think they're so bright, they don't listen to advice. So that's one thing. The other thing I agree with the speaker here, the West is on the way down. Whether we like it or not, it's on the way down. Yes, it is still very powerful militarily and technologically. And they have all these things. They have some money. Okay? That's true. But one of the elements of power is believability, trust. The West is not believable.
Cannot be trusted anymore.
And if you say something and nobody believes you, you are powerless. And what is happening in Haiti? Nobody believes anything. The Haitians don't believe any of those people, so they're powerless. Now, the Russians. Yes, I was in Moscow the other day. And they are not bad people, they look good. But
he's the one who's getting some funding. No, I'm just saying the Matan family.
That's okay. But you can see what's going on. Russia is in the forefront of challenging that American hegemony among them, together with the Chinese. And so they are busy talking about what, multipolarity. There are those people who insist, the US is unipolar power, it is hegemony, everybody must go along with what? And you have this, and wait a minute, you people are not believable, you are liars. They lied, or not lied, they promised. When the Soviet Union was collapsing, they cheated Gorbachev. Things,
they will not expand on NATO.
Yeah. And because Eastern Europe is threat to Russia. The Soviets can go, but Russia has to do what? Yes. And when that's why history is important.
Absolutely.
When they were discussing this issue at Yalta in 1945, that was the basis of the agreement. Yeah. That Russia had been invaded by
Napoleon Bonaparte,
Napoleon,
Hitler,
through Eastern Europe.
Hitler.
The Kaiser in World War I.
Yes.
Through Eastern Europe.
Yes.
Hitler through Eastern Europe. So for them, Eastern Europe
and the Mongols and the Tatars from the other side.
From the other side. So they say, no, this one we are not discussing. And that's how Europe was divided into two. And actually it was Winston Churchill suggested, and he drew a map and drew a line and said, do you agree to this? And he said, yes, okay. So it is a matter of survival. And George Bush, Daddy Bush, his people
George
are the
Bush
ones,
Senior.
Yes, Senior. He's the one who agreed to say, okay, we shall not do that.
And he went back on it.
No, his son and Clinton. Particularly Clinton is the one who did it. Bill Clinton. He ignored these things. And there were warnings repeatedly. What did that do to Russia? They felt double humiliated. They lost the Soviets,
Union, yes.
and the Cold War. They were humiliated.
The economy went to hell.
So, and then to make matters worse, they continue to be humiliated
on a daily basis.
On a daily basis, with people beating up their chests, saying, we are Americans, you can do anything you want. And when they ask, what are you doing? They ignored, they don't care. The arrogance. What that did to Russia, it made the Russians desperate for a strong man. And that strong man turned out to be who? Putin. And who promised to restore Russia's greatness. How he does it's another matter.
Right.
But it was not going to be by being subservient. So what we have now, if I may conclude that, there is a convergence of commonality or common sense. The rebellion, the movement in Africa, coincides with the attempt to make the Russians feel good again. So when you see these things, it's a convergence of interests. And there's nothing wrong with that. So,
all right. Yeah. Even as you had a rejoinder, just briefly, so that we can move on.
Let me begin with the things we agree. Mheshimiwa Farah, undoubtedly, Somalia has had its school of adversity. And history is replete with examples that once a country has gone through that, the next phase will have good things.
Yes.
And we wish them well with the moves that they are making. That's fantastic. The purest of the gold is one that comes out of burning in the hottest of the furnace. That's what the good book, the Bible says. Yeah. The second one is Prof, my teacher. Things are moving in Africa. People are unhappy. There is a rebellion, whether it is emerging or latent or in the open. There is a rebellion in Africa against the West. But what I'm saying, the tragedy with this is that we are rebelling from the hands of one imperial group to the hands of the other. And in the long term, I wonder whether that is going to be helpful. In this region, we have done that historically before. We were once upon a time under the Portuguese, particularly the coast. When the Arabs came, we welcomed them, said the Portuguese were bad. Now let me finish.
It's not the Arabs who chased the Portuguese away. You should say it's the Africans. Somalis chased the Portuguese away.
That's fine. Then the Arabs were replaced by the British. We thought, oh, wonderful, Western civilization, Industrial Revolution. But look at the tragedy the British imperial designs became. So the point I'm saying, you talked about Russia, a wonderful country, helped in the 60s to train our top doctors. They came back. But even those who went to the West also came back. The High Lives, the history of the High Lives is very well known. But the point I'm making is that in a situation of scramp and partition like the one we have now, there are no free ranches. An imperialist is an imperialist, either west or east. They mean one and the same thing.
Thank you.
They will alienate, they will dominate, and they will control.
All right. Even as we're talking about rebellion within Africa, we have the African Union, which has issued a firm warning against military coups across the continent, emphasizing the need to uphold peace and democracy to foster development. Ahead of the second AU Reflection Forum on unconstitutional changes of government scheduled for March, of course, which is ongoing 24, that is March the 18th. It is ongoing in Bankola, Adoeo. The African Union's Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security underscored the need to maintain peace and democracy across the continent to propel the need for development. It is necessary to restate that democracy, with its shortcomings, remains the best form of governance and will have always asked why. It is inclusive, and we all have a role to play in safeguarding democracy, and all of us in Africa must rally for democracy. Commissioner Adoe made reference to the 2022 Accra Declaration, which was endorsed by Africans' heads of state to help defend democracy and restore constitutional rule in countries led by military juntas, and indicated military juntas will not be tolerated. So we're talking about unclapping ourselves from the West. And what will be the best way to do this? Is coup the only way? Because this is what African Union is.
Coups are not the issues.
Coups are not the issues.
It's revolution.
Change is the issue.
It's
revolution. But
not
how does revolution happen?
Whichever way it comes.
Whichever way it begins.
Whichever way it comes.
Because this is where now they're really caught. Dr. Hassan Kanenje. So this warning and the revolutions, because we have now to uncouple ourselves. How do you do that?
It's a revolution by evolution.
Revolution by evolution.
Yes.
You might want to decipher that for us.
Yeah, because we have to evolve into a different mindset, and the words of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, decolonize our minds. Now, with regard to the African Union, it's very interesting. They are having a meeting, over this. We expect, of course, them to be able to discuss unconstitutional change in government. But one thing we need to know, or at least to remember, is consistency creates credibility. Inconsistency takes away any confidence in an institution and a system, and your word will not count for much. Every other unconstitutional change in government, what we have seen is sometimes statements, oftentimes mild statements of dissatisfaction by the AU. Then gradually, either military people, turn themselves into civilians, run for president, or the issue is forgotten altogether. But also fundamentally, what we're not be investing in is, you see, when you're having, for instance, popular revolutions, like what happened in West Africa, are you going to call that illegitimate, while it is unconstitutional, yet it's representative of what actually people's aspirations are, because the previous leaders were seen as puppets? And so what are we doing to ensure that actually the African leadership is representative of people's wishes and not cartoons or puppets of either foreign business or foreign enterprises or even some, foreign actors? Second, with all the due respect and kindness we have to our partners, African Union, lives in houses built by partners to the continent. Mostly, of course, Beijing, which has, donated pretty much, the structure that we have our meetings in. And I think one building in the United States called Berlin, because it was built by the Germans. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is not to diminish the kind of support, because that support, I think, has been very critical in, in ensuring that we can continue doing things that we need to do on the continent. But what it speaks to is also the lack of independence with regard to funding our own initiatives and our own agenda. The African Union's budget, I think, is something upwards of $600–700 million. Most of it is sourced from outside. You know how
from Europe,
exactly,
and America,
yes,
and Canada, of course, those countries, yes.
Do you know how embarrassing that is?
That's what I was coming to. Yeah.
Do you know how embarrassing that is? You know
who pays our bills?
Yes, and so how do we expect to be able to undertake changes, to take action against bad behavior by some of our leaderships when we cannot fund our own agenda, when we have to rely on well-wishers?
Just the only time it was mitigated is when Gaddafi used to pay the bills, and they got rid of him.
Yes, of course.
That's why they killed him.
Yeah. And
so does it serve the interests of Africans?
Of course, that's not the question. And so as a continent, and one of the things personally I've been a big proponent of is whether it's a regional organization such as IGAD, we should be able to
pay for it.
Pay for it. And so if we're going to get support from outside, let it be in addition to what we already have. But to the extent that we cannot even fund our own chai, we can't fund the seats we're sitting on, it becomes a challenge for us to actually have a viable continental organization. EU is not funded by foreigners. Other regional bodies out there are not funded by foreigners. So they can actually be able to take decisive action. So with us, we spend so much time on talking. Our budget is, well, now that the dollar has fallen, it's around 30 billion, US dollars. The entire African Union budget is about 600–700 million.
Look at for 50, how many? 50 what countries?
For 54 countries.
54 countries.
And we can't afford to do that. And so we have to go back to the basics that if we mean business with regard to African solutions to African problems, it has to be followed by African money.
Thank you. Right. Dr. Ken Mbongi, just briefly on that so that we can go.
AU with the coups in Africa, DIPAL, we have been here before as a continent. The 1960s and the part of the 70s was the era of military coups in the continent of Africa. And what we had from those nice councils that the men on horsebacks created, from National Salvation Council here, Revolutionary Council there, they actually did not save anybody. Because we went back to the same decadence that we were running away from when we had civilian regimes. The same primitive accumulation. The military men became the richest guys around in Africa, and now they use that opportunity to transform themselves from military men to civilian presidents, from President Olusegun Obasanjo in Nigeria, Jerry Rawlings in Ghana, and name it. But the reality which the African Union should contend with is the fact that when soldiers leave the barracks and go to the palaces test very nicely. They hardly leave. So what started in West Africa is likely to spread. Whether the African Union will actually find a way of dealing with this, I highly doubt, and I share the sentiments with what Hassan said earlier. There is a sense in which the AU is fairly toothless because of the source of funding. And because of that, at times it behaves as if it's politically clueless.
Right. Professor, I think it's Farah Malim. Farah Malim, the new. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No. The only thing I have a problem with is Dr. Bongi says we are captured, that we have to use the West's money. Because you have to use West's money, then ipso facto, basically it goes that we have to do the bidding for them. And then, hang on a minute. And then we also about talk about democracy and think democracy is something. Listen, there's nothing called democracy. The stuff you see out there is democracy. Because I am a living testimony of that. I've been rigged out 3 times. When I won the election, somebody else was declared the winner. It's a democracy, yes. Democracy. So, let me tell you. And then look at the way things happened. Uganda was literally in hell. Hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million plus people died. And Idi Amin and Okello and Obote and everybody. And then what happened? Museveni comes in. He at least stops the bleeding. The bloodbath is no longer there. He transforms himself into a democrat in civilians. And wins elections, I don't know how many times. And by the way, let me tell you one thing about Uganda, because I have a lot of interest in that country. And I go quite often there. There's no election that Museveni stood for that he did not win. There's never been any rigging. He wins all those elections. Ugandans will say, if nothing else, we have peace. We're not killing ourselves. You see what I mean? And then when it comes to primitive capital accumulation, that man is fascinated with his cows. You know what I mean? The Ankole cows. And
they brought bees here the other day when we went there.
Yeah, basically, let me tell you one thing. He does not do any of that theft. And he's even much better in our country than our country here, because in Uganda, it's not like here where ministers and people in everywhere will call for calls and then make sure that government contracts are given in a given manner. That guy does not interfere with private business. You want to apply for a contract with the government ministry or department or authority, you do it in the competitive manner they do it, and whoever gets it's none of his business. Not him, not anybody in his government, including the ministers who control those ministries, do interfere in that. So in a sense, private business is flourishing with the least corruption. Nothing comparable to what we do ourselves here. Okay. He's been there for the longest. And it started off as a military man, and it came in through a revolution. That revolution was a war. Go to now Kagame and Rwanda, and tell me something about Rwanda. That is one country where the president's number is known by everybody. You could literally call him from anywhere. But nobody wants to call him because they have no business. Everything is going smooth. Corruption is, I think, the least.
Yes.
Doesn't exist in that place. Development has been phenomenal. And all these things. And all that the West does is to tell us he has been there for too long. Is it their business if he's been there for too long?
He wants to get a successor even if
I don't care if
he says enough is enough.
Look, I don't care if he stays for another 50 years. I mean, if he's going to live that long. As long as he runs the country the way he runs it right now, and he's there through a process, I have no problem with that.
That process is democracy.
It's not, ours is democracy. And by the way, let me tell you one thing. That country, there's very little ethnicity there. Although that country experienced 1 million deaths, everybody knows. Every time Kagame runs for elections, he wins fair and square. Yeah. He wins fair and square. The Hutus, he's a Tutsi himself, even the Hutus vote for him because of that relative. Go to a country like Eritrea, which is very close to my heart. Isaias Afwerki has been there for the longest. But there's absolutely no corruption. He has zero capital accumulation himself. You know what I mean? His family are ordinary. His children go to the national draft. His daughter, his son, all of them, they go to a national draft. Like any other city, they go to public schools. They don't go to private schools. And that is one country where you can walk 3 o'clock in the morning and nobody will touch you. It's almost like, hang on, let me just finish. Now,
I need to give him
time. We have 9 ethnic communities, 2 very prominent religions, which are almost 50-50 or something closer to that. There is absolutely no conflict. I mean, then the sense of nationalism and patriotism on an Eritrean is something that you will appreciate and hope our country has it. Now, we claim to have had a what we call democracy for the longest, since independence. What do we have? When we live here, democracy, corruption, ethnicity, the society is divided, lack of patriotism because you're patriotic to the Luya nation or you're patriotic to the Kenyan nation.
Thank you.
Get my point?
Thank you, Farah.
So in a sense...
I need to butt in.
No,
I need to butt in. No.
I finished.
Finish.
Let us reevaluate a lot of these things and see where the interests of our own people in the continent are.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah. Professor Mashara Munene.
Okay, yeah, the coups and revolutions.
Two things.
Saviors and people who think they are kings. Okay? So when you have a coup, you are just changing one head with another without any thinking. It's just that so-and-so is Bongi is the president, and he looks good, I also want to be the president. Get rid of him and I'm sitting. No change in any way. Revolutions are different. It's not so much somebody's head. It's the system that has to be thrown out.
Regardless of how.
Regardless of how.
Yeah.
And there are coups, I mean, there are revolutions that start as coups. And some of them, you can tell, started as a coup and then became a revolution. And then we have, Farah has brought in the issue of Museveni, Kagame, and Afwaki, and even want to put Putin in there, in that group.
Putin, yes, also Putin in there.
These are people who are seen as saviors.
Yes.
Because they take the country out of the dredge, in the terrible condition. And people are looking for somebody to save them from the mess. And they come in. And that's why Museveni is so popular, because he saved the country from very terrible situation. From when he took over in 1986, writing in the fighting in some bush somewhere.
Yes. NRA.
And from that time, you cannot touch Museveni, because people remember you don't want to go back to that situation. Same thing with Kagame. The genocide is still fresh in the people's mind. And he seems to have done well in that thing. So he is also a savior like Museveni. Afewaki in Eritrea fought for years before he would manage to get the country separated from Ethiopia. So you have there that now and transform the whole thing. So the revolutionaries are different from coup plotters. If we say something about Putin, the Russians were crying because of the humiliation, everything. Yes. And he comes, he's a savior to the Russians. And so, very popular. The election that was held the other day, he just swept. Although some people don't like the fact that he did it genuinely. Yes. They don't like the fact. So we make that distinction between revolutionaries and coup plotters. So when the AU talks, it should be talking about coup plotters, but it cannot talk about the revolutionaries, because it cannot be stopped anyway, whatever one thinks.
So are the coup plotters revolutionaries as well? Because now...
Not necessarily.
Because you say also revolution can begin from a coup.
It can start... Okay, look, Muammar Gaddafi, who was killed for his attempt at creating some alternatives, is one person who plotted a coup which became a revolution when he was in high school.
He was in high school?
Yeah, when he started plotting these things. And when his coup...
He ran the country so well.
His coup in 1969, actually it's one of the three coups. One was in Sudan, the other one was in Somalia.
Yes.
And it is his that became a revolution. The others were jokes. And then the whole thing. Now, his was the last expected. In fact, these others were expecting about 3 or 4 other coups. Egypt was expecting one. The Israelis were expecting one. The Americans were expecting one. They were all expecting a coup other than the one that took place. And it was not simply a coup, because it was a well-crafted thing.
At the age of 29?
Yeah.
He was 29 when he...
To overthrow things and restart the whole thing. Turn Libya into a powerhouse with the resources. And as Farah was saying, you could not accuse him of corruption. You know, but he had big ideas which transformed Libya. And for that, he became a threat to some interest and had to go. And Hillary Clinton is the one who was very happy that Gaddafi was dead.
Gone. That is gone.
Yeah. She said, we came, we saw he died. so you see, you can see there is a difference there. So what is going on in Western, the Sahel, in West Africa, is actually a revolution. These young people who are very clear in their mind that the system has to change, one way or the other. How they do it is not the issue. Now, West Africa, ECOWAS misunderstood that and started saying something they had to regret. It's a change this thing. I think we also made the same mistake in this place. To some extent, barbecue may be learning from
Those Sahel countries,
Yeah,
yes.
because he keeps up.
Yes.
And they say, what's going on? So we can also do that, can't we?
Absolutely.
And that's what you have is some revolutionary moments.
Thank you. All right, we remain with a few minutes. No, let's just wind up on that so that we can get that other stories.
I just wanted to say something with regard to that.
No, because of time. Today, my director, she's
Even
on
for
my
a
neck.
second?
Even for a second. We just want to move on to so that we can get highlights on Putin as well, and also on the Rafah assault, where President Vladimir Putin won a record post-Soviet landslide in Russia's election on Sunday, cementing his already tight grip on power in a victory he said showed Moscow had been right to stand up to the West and send its troops into Ukraine. Putin, a former KGB lieutenant colonel who first rose to power in 1999, made it clear that the results should send a message to the West that its leaders will have to reckon with an emboldened Russia, whether in war or in peace, for many more years to come. His outcome means Putin, who is 71, is set to embark on a new 6-year term that will see him overtake Joseph Stalin and become Russia's longest-serving leader for more than 200 years if he completes it. Putin won 87.8% of the vote, the highest ever result in Russia's post-Soviet history, according to an exit poll by pollster the Public Opinion Foundation from the Russian Republic Opinion Research Center, that is VCOM, put Putin on 87%. First official results indicated the polls were accurate. The United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, and other nations have said the vote was neither free nor fair due to the imprisonment of political opponents and censorship. All right, we want just to also get just a moment.
We should have added that he also fought in Africa.
All right,
with the freedom fighters in the south, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, South Africa, ANC. As a young KGB officer, he fought in those wars. He was there at the moment, and you see it right now. He's there in history. So he has his roots also in Africa.
All right. I want to just also to move on to the latest development as far as Rafah, and that is the Rafah assault is concerned, where Netanyahu says Israel to press on with the assault plan. On Sunday, he said he will keep on with the military campaign against Hamas in Gaza, where aid agency says famine is looming, while ceasefire talks were set to resume. Netanyahu told a cabinet meeting that Israel will push into Rafah, the last relatively safe place in the tiny, crowded Gaza enclave after more than 5 months of war. Let's just listen in, then we can get our closing remarks on these 2 points.
To win this war, we must destroy the remaining Hamas battalions in Rafah. If not, Hamas will regroup, rearm, and reconquer Gaza. And then we're back to square one. And that's an intolerable threat that we cannot accept. We will destroy Hamas, free our hostages, and ensure that Gaza doesn't ever pose a threat to Israel again. We will finish the job in Rafah while enabling the civilian population to get out of harm's way. We've taken measures to minimize civilian casualties that no other army has taken in history.
All right, just to remind you also that she sends congratulations to Putin regarding the re-elections as well. That was what was on the China Daily. Even as we're getting our closing remarks, we'll begin with you, Daktari. What are your comments on the 2 stories so far? Just briefly, within 30 seconds. My director, she's really...
In 30 seconds, it's going to be, because the thing on Gaza would actually have deserved a little bit better treatment, on that.
All right, we can reserve that for next week. Yes.
Yeah. If I have to make a quick one, there was more than 74% turnout in Russia. That is a real overwhelming endorsement of Putin, so whether or not you like him. Perhaps just a statement to close over on the Gaza. There is no time living memory since the Nagasaki bombing and Hiroshima that there has been so much destruction in a single place. Israel has dropped more bombs on Gaza than total population of bombs or number of bombs that were dropped in the entire period of the Second World War. That's how much damage has done. And to the extent that a lot of collective West, who are our friends, their complacency is going to haunt them for years to come, and it's going to have repercussions, not just on security, but also on the faith in liberal democracy that most of us in the global South have always looked up to. And it's something that they need to really rethink about it. You cannot be dropping aid and you're still dropping bombs at the same time.
Right. Let's hear from Dr. Wong, your closing remarks.
I want to remain within the continent and say, we say that a good dancer knows when to leave. When you stay for too long, you spoil the dance. President Museveni, President Kagame, wonderful people, transform their countries, saviors. But if I were them, it is time to go if they want to leave a legacy. Because Africa has a history with strong men. If they don't live well,
thank you,
then the country gets into perpetual instability and violence.
Right. Don't overstay your welcome.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
Professor
I would
Bashir?
agree with Kenneth there. Great men know when to leave. And that's why Mandela was a great man. He knew when to leave. And Nyerere was also great because he read the signs on the wall and then he left. So he knew how to leave. But on the issue of the Gaza and Russia, the reaction from the West is understood. There's nothing new in that.
Thank you.
But he won properly.
Thank you.
In Gaza, the West is hostage to Netanyahu. So he does strange things, and they dare not say that he's doing wrong.
We'll pick it up next week. Farah Malim, your closing remarks?
Yeah, mine. Okay, Putin, congratulations. Gaza is the beginning of the end of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. They will lose it, and they will lose it big time. And Hamas will never be defeated. It's not Hamas, it's the 14 million Palestinians and all the friends they have in all over. And by the way, it's only a matter of time that some of those countries, Arab countries around them, will be forced to open up their borders to allow volunteers to go in there. But if that happens, I have no doubt in my mind not less than 1 million people would want to walk into there, because the killing and the carnage that is there is the hypocrisy.
Thank you.
Of the genociders, because the same thing King Leopold did in Congo, killing 5 million people, Africans those days. I mean, exactly that is what's happening. And they're all not complacency, it's complicit. They are giving the bombs, they are giving the money, they are doing everything.
Right. That is still a developing story. We can pick it up next week. Thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. Always a treat having you on Wednesday. A lot of learning that I get to, of course, absorb here as far as international relations is